By 1920, Americans were exhausted. A decade of progressive crusades, high wartime taxes, and the brutal reality of global conflict had drained the nation. They were ready to swap the trenches for the trading floor. Presidential candidate Warren G. Harding offered a return to normalcy. In practice, this meant tearing down the complex economic controls established during World War I and getting the federal government out of private business. But stepping back created a massive oversight vacuum. Harding populated his cabinet with close political allies from back home, a group known as the Ohio Gang. Without strict supervision, these friends quickly realized they could exploit federal resources for their own gain. Harding's hands-off approach was designed to spark economic growth. Instead, stripping away the guardrails invited some of the most spectacular corruption in American history. The financial scale of the theft was staggering. Colonel Charles Forbes, an acquaintance of Harding, managed to siphon off about $250 million from the Veterans Bureau by selling off scarce medical supplies and pocketing the cash. Then came Teapot Dome. Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall quietly allowed private corporations to lease prime U.S. Navy oil reserves in Wyoming and California. In exchange, Fall accepted over $300,000 in secret bribes, eventually becoming the first cabinet secretary to go to prison. You might expect the public to demand stricter federal oversight to stop the bleeding. Instead, they drew the opposite conclusion. Americans looked at the scandals and decided that government itself was inherently corrupt. If Washington couldn't be trusted, the best solution was to give Washington even less power. Harding died of a sudden illness in 1923, right before the worst of the news broke. Vice President Calvin Coolidge took the oath of office and immediately tapped into this deep public distrust. He adopted an aggressively minimalist agenda, arguing that business leadership, not political intervention, drove national success. The Teapot Dome scandal provided the perfect political tailwind. Coolidge used the public's outrage over government corruption as a mandate to hand control of the economy entirely to the private sector. To build this new economy, Coolidge relied on his Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon. Mellon operated with a strict three-part checklist: national debt and slash taxes. Congress aggressively targeted the wealthiest Americans, dropping their tax rate from 73% down to 25%. This is supply-side economics. Mellon argued this freed-up capital injected into the market grows the economy so large that a smaller rate generates more total revenue. Over at the Commerce Department, Herbert Hoover applied a similar logic to regulation. He championed cooperative individualism, encouraging businesses to form trade associations and voluntarily share data with the government. Efficiency would be achieved through teamwork, bypassing the need for federal rules. The economic policies of the 1920s were highly engineered strategies to shrink the state. They rested entirely on Coolidge's conviction that the chief business of the American people is business. It is widely assumed that the United States isolated itself from the rest of the world during this decade. But America didn't retreat. It simply swapped military force for financial leverage, acting as the world's dominant creditor. By the 1920s, European allies owed the U.S. $10 billion in war debt. At the same time, Germany's economy was being crushed under the weight of massive reparations payments, leading to a severe financial crisis. Instead of deploying diplomats to solve the crisis, the U.S. sent an American banker, Charles G. Dawes. In 1924, he brokered an agreement where private American banks would issue massive loans directly to Germany. Here is how the Dawes Plan flow of capital worked. American loans flowed to Germany, allowing them to pay reparations to Britain and France. Britain and France then took that cash and paid down their war debts to the United States Treasury. The entire fragile piece of Europe was essentially underwritten by private American capital. The U.S. didn't need to join the League of Nations to manage global affairs. Its bankers were already doing it to protect their investments. American foreign policy operated like a corporate risk management strategy. The goal was to maximize financial returns while ensuring the globe remained stable enough for uninterrupted commerce. This corporate approach also explains the decade's sudden push for arms control. In 1921, representatives from 8 major nations met at the Washington Conference to discuss disarmament. The motivation was heavily financial. Everyone wanted to avoid paying for another massive naval arms race. Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes proposed a 10-year halt on the construction of new warships, resulting in the Five-Power Naval Limitation Treaty. To the U.S. government, these ships were enormous, unnecessary floating capital expenditures that needed to be cut. This culminated in 1928 with the Kellogg-Briand Pact, an ambitious agreement where the United States and 14 other nations officially agreed to abandon war entirely and settle disputes peacefully. Scrapping warships and outlawing combat served as the ultimate global cost-cutting measures. Promoting world peace fit perfectly with Andrew Mellon's domestic mission to dramatically shrink the federal budget. The United States engaged in a calculated dual reality during the 1920s. At home, Washington steadily dismantled its own regulatory power, while abroad, it secured global supremacy through the aggressive export of capital. This era of normalcy functioned as a rigorous, calculated experiment in using capital to create stability. The government stepped away from direct control, allowing financial markets to dictate the direction of the country and the world. For leaders like Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, the pursuit of wealth was the engine of human progress. They viewed capital accumulation as the necessary prerequisite for scientific advancement, the spread of knowledge, and the expansion of individual liberty.